Okay, so a WIC 5150 is also known as a 72-hour hold. This means the detention of a mentally disordered person for evaluation and treatment for a period of 72 hours for persons alleged to meet the legal criteria of being a danger to self, danger to others, or gravely disabled due to a mental disorder. Okay, so that's what we call the SI or HI, suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation. The third one would be gravely disabled. So people ask me, well, what does gravely disabled mean? So let me give you an example. I had a patient a couple of weeks ago whose wife came in with him. It was an elderly patient. And she came in, she looked a little disheveled. She had drove her car to the clinic and walked in and said, I need some help with my husband. And so I went out with another nurse and we went to evaluate him. And he was sitting in the front seat of his car. It was an elderly gentleman, probably in his mid 80s. And he had urinated on himself. He had defecated on himself. He was very, very pale. I took his vital signs. His heart rate was low. Blood pressure was low. I asked her when the last time he ate or drank something was. And she said, I try to get him to drink water, but he won't. It's been at least a couple of days. Okay. So I had a gentleman, he was not alert. He was alert and oriented, maybe times 1, times 2, but didn't know where he was at, knew his name and knew the date, but that was pretty much it. He just said, it's Monday. My name is Michael. I think that's what he said. Anyway, but he hadn't been eating. He was not doing any of his own self-care. She couldn't move him. He had difficulty ambulating. This is gravely disabled. Do you understand why? So he had a cognitive and he had dementia. So he had a severe cognitive impairment as well. This would be the definition of a 5150 when a patient is gravely disabled. They're not eating, they're not drinking, their bowel and bladder habits are off. She said he hadn't been sleeping well and he was not ambulatory. So he met quite a few of the criteria. So we called EMS based on a 5150. He was not a threat to self or a threat to others, but he was gravely disabled. So that would be an example of what a patient who looks gravely disabled is. This could potentially be a patient with dementia or organic brain syndrome. So oftentimes once we get them to the hospital, we'll look for placement for those patients. We'll put them into a facility where the patient can be held based on neurocognitive issues or some type of organic brain syndrome. For the other ones, danger to self or danger to others, we're going to keep them for 72 hours. Minimum criteria. We have to evaluate and see whether or not we can get the patient balanced or at least stable within those 72 hours. Get them back on their meds, evaluate how the patient's doing. If they still have suicidal ideation after 48 hours. So this is our 72-hour hold evaluation time. Okay. Patients don't leave before those 72 hours, especially if they've been admitted as a full acute care patient. Okay. So we get to those 72 hours. Now we have to figure out what are we going to do with the patient now? Are they stable to be discharged? Are they getting the resources they need? Are they back on their meds? Are they no longer expressing wanting to hurt themselves or hurt other people? If we have not made that determination, it goes to what we call a WIC 5250. And this is also known as a 14-day hold. So you go from 72 hours to 14 days. Okay, this is the certification for intensive treatment for a period of 14 days for persons alleged to meet the legal criteria of being a danger to self or others or gravely disabled due to a mental health disorder. Okay, this is certification for intensive treatment. This is 14 days in addition to the 3 days that they were held. Okay, a lot of you are going to see WIC 5250s because the patients are there on the longer hold. The next one is a WIC 5260. This is also known as an additional 14-day hold. So this is additional intensive treatment of a suicidal person. So this is specific to a person who has expressed SI or suicidal ideation. This is certification for an additional period of 14 days beyond a WIC 5250. So we did the WIC 5150, that was 72 hours. They went to a 5250 within that 14-day period. Patient is still being addressed for potential SI or suicidal ideation. They go to a 5260. Okay, so this is a person who is actively needing treatment for potential suicidality. So this is an additional 14 days. So now we're talking about 31 days here, right? Because we've got 3, 14, and an additional 14. Okay. So this is specifically who are allegedly imminently suicidal due to a mental disorder. Okay. A 5270.15 is also known as a 30-day hold. This is an additional intensive treatment for an additional period of 30 days beyond a WIC 5250, okay? For the first 14 days for persons who were gravely disabled on the first 14-day hold and allegedly remained gravely disabled due to a mental disorder. So what happened is we went from 5150 to 5250 to a 5270.15 for patients who are gravely disabled. This means they can't find placement for them. They're looking for a facility, maybe a locked facility for somebody with Alzheimer's disorder, or someplace that needs more safety restraints, or they can't find placement for the patient, or the patient's not stable. So they added an additional 30 days. So the person who's gravely disabled went from 72 hours to 14 days to 5270.15. You guys following me? Give me a thumbs up if you're following me, guys. Cool. All right. Your last one is WIC 5300. This is also known as a 180-day post-cert code, okay? This is post-certification procedure for an imminently dangerous person for a period of 180 days beyond a WIC 5250, which is your first 14-day hold, for persons who have allegedly made a serious threat of substantial physical harm or attempted or inflicted physical harm on another due to a mental disorder. So we went from WIC 5150 to WIC 5250, and this is for a patient with HI, which is homicidal ideation, to a 5300. This is 180 days. This is post-certification. You have to have judicial review for this. It means that a judge has to come in and decide whether or not this is equitable to what the patient's issues are. So basically, we need a lot of time with this patient because they're threatening to other people, they're threatening to hurt other people, they've got homicidal ideation that has not been de-escalated. So this is potentially a really long post-certification period of time.
Professor, I got a quick question real quick.
Yes, please.
So you saying SI and HI, so suicidal ideation and the other one HI. So
Homicidal.
what? Yeah, what are the homicide? What are the key differences in between though? You can just use the term and interchangeably.
So that's a good question. So suicidal ideation really has to do with threat to self. So the idea that, their depression is so egregious, they've had major depressive disorder for a long time. Maybe there's some triggers in their life that have made it worse. They've lost their job, they've lost their marriage, they don't see their family members. All these things that may have exacerbated their condition. So, the intent is that they want to hurt themselves. They want to take their own life. Homicidal ideation is different in the fact that they may have no intention on hurting themselves. They have no intention on causing self-harm. Their intention is to cause harm to others, particularly if they feel that someone, some entity, some person, some church, some school, somebody out there has done something to hurt them to the point where they want to actually impose violence or aggression on a community, on a person, not themselves, on someone outside of their immediate realm of who they are. So they are actually they have intent to hurt others. Does that make sense?
So yeah, so two questions. So that's my first question. So now the 5150, 72 hours hold that encompass all kinds of uh like a big umbrella.
Yes.
But when it comes to the WIC 5250 and 5250 and 5260, they're both for SI and HI specific, right? When it comes to 14 days whole.
Yes. So the 5250 is specific for people who are a danger to self or others, or gravely disabled. So that's like your additional 14 days in addition to that, those first 3 days. It's usually, you can't get that patient to a baseline. You can't establish the patient's back on their medications, or it's not an acute, like, oh, I was just feeling that way because I was so down. I'm feeling a lot better. I've got a support system behind me. I know I've got some resources. So if that doesn't get handled in those first 3 days and you need that additional 14 days, yes, you have that ability for those 14 days to be there for people who are a threat to self or a threat to others or gravely disabled. So it's sort of an extension of that 5150. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Michelle, does that?
Yeah, no, yes, it
Those are
does.
great questions.
And my last question to you is: so if you classify somebody as a homicidal HI, right?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, that person end up killing himself or herself. So is that a multiple qualifications between SI and HI? For example, active shooter intended to kill himself.
Absolutely. Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
you would have I mean, especially if there's plan or intent. If the person has plan or intent and those are the questions that you ask, Michelle. Like you ask, have you had any thoughts about hurting yourself or hurting others? And the patient says, I've had lots of thoughts about hurting somebody because this person did this to me or this entity did this to me. So yes, I have. And then the next question is, do you have a plan? Well, yes, I have guns in my house and I know if I need them, I have them. And intent, yeah, I know that the church or the synagogue is going to have this many people there on a Sunday, so my intent is to go that day. You have all your criteria. That is more than enough to put that patient on a hold. Absolutely. So it's uncomfortable because you got to do the digging and you got to get the
Mhm.
questions. And sometimes the answers are shocking, but it gives you criteria to be able to say, this is why this person needs to be held for this long, especially with 180-day hold. You're talking about putting somebody in the hospital for up to 6 months. So you have
So
to
the
be able to substantiate why.
So the only legality that it comes in place that the hospitals have SOPs specifically without outsourcing any judge intervention. It's all the way to 30 days. After that, you do have to have a court order for this specific, especially 180 days. Correct?
Absolutely. And it has to
Okay.
be reviewed periodically. Like the judge will even say, I'll review this in 3 weeks, or I'll review this every 6 weeks. Or so you have to have, criteria as to when the reevaluation is done as well on this. And for all intents and purposes, you may have to have permanent placement for a patient who has, significant schizophrenia that is uncontrolled and that the person has HI as a result of delusional or hallucinatory behaviors. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it does sometimes lead to that. But I'm gonna caveat this with you, Michelle, and we'll go into this more as a discussion envelops over the course of time. But one of the things that mentally ill patients or mental health advocates say is that not everyone who does egregious or violent acts is mentally ill. And that's not to say that there aren't mentally ill patients that could potentially do those things. There's a reason why we have these codes. But advocates for mentally ill patients are saying you're blaming mentally ill patients for things that people do against society that are not necessarily rooted in mental illness. You're giving mentally ill patients a bad name because not everybody who has mental illness is going to do egregious activity or is going to do something that's that aggressive or violent. Sometimes people are just not good people. Sometimes people are just not. And it doesn't mean that they're mentally ill. So there's that argument that's going out there a lot, especially as you see these horrible things that are happening in communities and public and where, well, it's because we haven't put enough money into mental health. I absolutely agree with that. But the argument is with people who have mental illness that we're categorizing people who do things against society as having mental health issues when not everyone does. So that's a discussion we're going to have. We're going to go down this path because it's very controversial. And the argument continues to be one that's brought up as a result of things that we see that are done that can be, depicted as being so egregious to people in general. So we'll talk about it more. But thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you bringing up those points. Really important. Okay. So guys, you need to know these codes because when you go into the hospital, this is going to be the reason why patients are placed into a acute care facility. So you'll see a lot of you are going to see patients that are newly admitted. They'll be 5150s. A lot of patients will be there on 14-day holds as well, 5250s or 5260s. Okay. Primarily look for the first 4 codes. That's what you're going to be looking at. And anybody who comes in as a first-time patient, they may have left on Sunday and came back Monday night. It's a new 5150, starting all over again, even if they came back within a 24-hour period. Okay. Okay. And then I want to show you. Okay, we're going to go into. Okay, so that's in modules 1 for the week, guys, just so that you know. Okay. I want to share this with you because so many of you guys are going to be doing our first couple of days, guys, you're going to be, or first couple of weeks that you're working with the patients, you're going to need to develop your skills to talk to patients. Because if you've never talked to a patient with mental illness before, it can be challenging. So much of it ends up wanting to be about us. We want to share about us. And this is not about us. It's about the patient. So when you have a regular conversation with somebody and it's reciprocated, how you doing today? I'm doing great. How are you doing? I'm doing well. Oh, really? What's going on with you in your life? And it goes, you volley back and forth. This is not about volleying back and forth. This is about focusing on what the patient needs. The patient is there to express themselves. And it doesn't mean you can't have a conversation with them that's a shared conversation, but it's not about you. It's about them. So it's going to be really important that the focus stays on the patient. One of the things that we do not do in mental health from now until the end of time, guys, we don't ask why. And there's a specific, go ahead.
Question. So what would be the best way to ask the patient? Is it like open-ended question?
Sometimes it's, for the most part, it's going to be open-ended. Sometimes, once in a great while, you'll need to use a closed-ended question if the patient is actively psychotic. So if you want to engage the patient, you want them to talk, you want them to tell you about their life and, you know, what's going on with them and triggers that have occurred and, you know, past experiences that they've gone through. But you want to be really conscientious. If you have somebody who's psychotic and they're coming in and they're delusional and hallucinating, this is not the time to ask them, so tell me what happened when you were 7 years old, when the patient isn't ready to engage in a conversation like that right now. Right now, we have to de-escalate the situation. They may have to give them Haldol or Benadryl, give them a cocktail to get them back down to a normative state. And this is not the time to have those open communication dialogue. The patient's not going to be able to have that kind of conversation. So once in a great while, you're going to have to use a closed-ended question. It's usually in emergency psychiatric situations. But for the most part, I'd say 80% of the time, you'll be able to have that open communication and dialogue, which I really encourage you to do. I do have a therapeutic communication handout sheet for you to use, guys. So if you go under your files, I really like this. This is a nice sheet and sort of gives you a it's just sort of like icebreakers for patients when you want to talk to them and really focus on what the patient's needs are. So if you look in your files, look for TC, your therapeutic communication handout. Let me share this with you. Okay, so this is a quick checklist. I always tell students, you just like put it somewhere you can find it easy, even if you just print it out and put it in your pocket and have it available, especially when you get stuck. You're like, I don't know what to talk to this person about. Like, I'm pretty much talking about everything. Ask those questions, just like you were saying, open-ended questions, focus on feelings, state behaviors observed, reflect, restate, rephrase, verbalization of patient, a neutral response, just letting them talk, shaking your head to, you know, to acknowledge that they're saying something, somebody's listening to them. Effective communication should be appropriate, simple, adaptive, concise, and credible. Things like offering yourself, making self available, and showing interest and concerns. I will walk with you. That's a big one. Hey, you know, patients just sitting there, you know, just kind of bored, and ask them, hey, do you want to take a walk? It's okay to ask. It's okay to do that. Active listening, paying close attention to what the patient is saying by observing both verbal and nonverbal cues. If I sit there and you come up to me and say, hey, would you like to take a walk with me? And I'm going, yeah, I'd love to take a walk. That sounds amazing. No, I'm sure my body language is not matching what I'm saying. It's incongruent. So if I'm angry or I'm upset or I'm frustrated, may not be the time to engage at that point. Maybe wait a little while before, well, it looks like you're maybe not ready to. So let me know when you like to take a walk. It's okay to do. Or when you want to talk for a bit, I'm happy to give you an ear, whatever it takes. But pay attention to their body language, because if they're not in an open place to be able to have those kinds of conversations, it may not be the most appropriate time to try and engage with them. Exploring things like maintaining eye contact and making verbal remarks to clarify and encourage further communication. Tell me about your family. People love talking about their families, except when they don't. Sometimes the family members can be a object of contention, especially if they assimilate you with being one of those family members. So there is a term that we use in in psychiatry that basically just allows that offering of self, but also when a person assimilates you with being somebody that they have a negative experience with, or they have a positive experience, they may put onto you that experience, or they may feel that you represent something negative to them or positive. But if you get that feeling from them, then it may be a good idea to step away, especially if they assimilate you with being something negative in their life. So these are just some samples of what might be helpful. And the reason that we don't use why is because it can come across as being derogatory. So if Andrew, I go to see Andrew and I say, hey, Andrew, how's it going? And he goes, I'm doing all right. And I say, so why are you here then? Don't you think Andrew would go, well, aren't you the one who's supposed to tell me why I'm here? You know, and that's what we're trying to explore. We're trying to understand what some of the rationales to what the patient needs may be are. And when you say why, it comes across to the patient like you should know the answer. If the patient knew the answer, they wouldn't be there. So it can really turn the patient off. It can really set the tone as being very negative. So be careful with that, because it's a natural transgression that we want to say. We want to know the answer. So we say why. Not in mental health. Stay away from it. It can really trap you into a corner, and patients get really frustrated with you if you ask them that, because they'll look at you and go, isn't that kind of why I'm here? This is what I'm trying to figure out. Okay. Be conscientious of the verbiage you use. You will screw up. Let me just tell you that right now. You will say something and have to take your foot out of your mouth. My first rotation in mental health 20 something years ago, I was at County USC and I had two patients. I was working with three, sorry. There were three of us who were playing cards and we were playing hearts. And there was a gentleman in front of me who was full on manic, full on. Okay. He had bipolar disorder and he hadn't taken his meds in a long time. So he was bouncing off the walls, right? Just full on manic. And then two others were on 72-hour holds and for SI. Both of them had significant suicidal ideation. So they weren't in the best of moods, right? So both of them were kind of quiet, but this guy would not stop talking. The guy that I was partnered with, the one who was having a manic episode. So we're playing cards and he's just full on excited and got all this energy, and he's looking at me and he's like, okay, here we go. Okay, it's your turn. Okay, oh, you got it. Okay, here we go. Right. And I was like, okay, cool. Right. We're playing. And these two other guys are giving him a look like, just please shut up. Just stop talking. Right. And we're all playing. So we're going around and around. He's like, oh, see what's happening? Look what they're doing. Oh my God. Oh, you got it. Okay, here we go. Right. So he's just full on, right? And at one point, I'm just like about right here, right? And I go, okay, brother, I got you. Like, you got to stop being so crazy. Oh, I said it. Right. And I was like, oh my God, I said it. And I caught myself even before it came out. And he stared at me for a second. And these two other guys just started laughing. They just started busting up laughing, right? He's looking at me. He smiles. He goes, okay, here we go. Let's go. So he just kept going, right? But I knew I put my foot in my mouth and I apologized. I said, hey guys, that was the wrong word. I am so sorry. It was not something I meant to come out. It just came out. Sorry about that. And they're like, don't worry about it. We know where we're at. So I was like, so I mean, they were really cool about it, but you're going to say things afterwards. And that's why you do the IPA, so you can reflect back and go, oh, could I have said this differently? Or what should I have said instead of? So just be conscientious. It's okay. You'll mess up. I did. I still do, but that's all right. Okay. All right. So that's in there for you too. I do suggest that you have that ready for you the first day too. I'm going to stop